Alright, today we're going to be replacing the transmission fluid on the 2007 Saturn Vue. It's the 3.5 V6 engine. It's got a Honda engine and it's an MJ7 MJ8 transmission. If you're not sure what your transmission is or how much will come out when you drain, you just Google what transmission is in my car and you can put in the make, model and year. Really easy. So this vehicle will need 5 quarts of transmission fluid. For this particular transmission we will need to make sure it is Honda Z1 certified, I think that's the word there, or compatible. So that's for this particular transmission here. We need a transmission catch pan, lots of old rags because it is a messy job. The transmission refill port is really small and tiny, so we'll need a really tiny funnel or surgical tubing. A bigger funnel so we can put this funnel into this little funnel and refill it. A socket wrench and just a standard 3/8 inch drive which will take the bolt off our transmission drain plug. Other transmissions are closed systems, which means you cannot drain them. You'll need to take them to a factory or replace the whole thing, depending on what your transmission issue is. But today we're just replacing the fluid. First and foremost, get your car up to operating temperatures. It'll take 5 to 10 minutes. Just take the car on some errands or something like that. This way the transmission fluid temperature reaches 140 to 158 degrees Fahrenheit. You will not really need to jack the vehicle up for this, especially on this car. It's so accessible, you can jack up if you want to. The next thing, turn the steering wheel all the way to the left. This makes the drain plug easily accessible. Okay, so I'm just going to show you where the drain plug is on this transmission. So we should be all the way turned to the left. Get your extension. We actually need a really small one, not the big one I just showed you at the start of the video. And underneath the car, this is your transmission right here, this ugly thing with lots of bolts in. This is the drain plug. So this is a standard extension and this just goes in this square socket right here. Okay, with the extension bar installed here, we just need to break the bolt. Not literally, just figuratively. If it is quite tough, I've prepared this penetration grease made of transmission oil mixed with acetone. It's a 50-50. I'm just going to put a little of that on the drain plug here because it is really tough and it is not breaking right now. Okay, I've put the penetration grease on there. It's still really tough. One trick is to bring the socket towards you and just hold on to the hood of the car and use your foot to try and loosen the drain plug there. Once you've broke the transmission drain plug nut, slide in your drain pan. You want to work as closely as possible to avoid mess. Alright, be careful, the transmission fluid may be quite hot as we've warmed up the engine of the vehicle. Make sure the oil pan's directly below the nut and slowly unscrew with your hands. It will gush out a lot faster than oil because it's a lot less viscous. And be wary of the smell. You'll get well acquainted with the smell of transmission oil during this process. Alright, have your rags on standby because about 5 quarts will drop from this transmission. When the plug comes out like so, just clean off the end of the plug. On this one there's a lot of black goop. It shouldn't smell burnt, but if it needs a change it also won't be the colour of transmission fluid. It'll be really brown and rusted coloured. But okay, while the transmission fluid is draining, it should take about 4 or 5 minutes. I just want to go through a few tips on transmissions that you should know. Now, firstly, this car, Saturn Vue 2007 3.5 engine, it either has a MJ7 or a MJ8 transmission. If you're not sure what your transmission is, just type in Google, what is my transmission? You can put in the make, model and year of your car and it'll tell you. It's really cool. Also, when you find out the model of your transmission, you can find out how much transmission fluid your transmission holds. The MJ7, which is this car, 9.1 quarts. The MJ8, 8.6 quarts. So around 9 quarts between the two. This car was fitted with both those transmissions, so you really don't know which one you have without checking. When you drain the fluid, you're not draining all of the fluid in the transmission. Not really when you do an oil change, you're pretty much getting all of the oil out. With a transmission, automatic transmissions, more than half of the transmission fluid, usually, maybe less than, but sometimes around 50% even, lives in the torque converter. That is something which usually does not have a plug. Well, in this car it doesn't. Some vehicles do, but it usually doesn't. And if the transmission is a closed system, you will have to take it to a dealership because there is no drain plug. When this drain has been done on this vehicle, about 5 quarts will drop. If we know the capacity of the transmission fluid in the whole transmission is, say, 9.1 quarts, that being an MJ7 transmission, we know that 4.1 quarts live in the torque converter. So we're getting 60% of the transmission fluid out of this transmission. Now, the old transmission fluid will mix with the new transmission fluid that we're about to put in, but overall it will increase the quality of the fluid as a whole. As long as it's compatible, it can mix just fine. Now, if you want to do a total flush, you will probably need to take it to a specialist garage and have them flush it out completely. This particular transmission, Honda don't actually recommend flushing the system at all. So in the service manual, this is a recommended way of changing the fluid. So I recommend around 50,000 miles perform these steps. Some people might do 25,000, but I think 50,000 is a good way of getting 60% of the old transmission fluid out of your transmission. You can also perform this procedure almost immediately afterwards, say the very next day, and this ensures almost a complete flush of the liquid in the system if you're getting 60% out each time. So you're probably more getting 80-85, which is almost a total flush of the fluid by doing it properly and by doing it by Honda standards for this transmission. Okay, we're almost about fully drained there, so I'm going to put the nut back on the transmission. One last thing, you can do a full change if you disconnect the transmission from the radiator and pump in transmission while running your engine. But you know, if you know what you're doing, yeah, sure, go ahead and you have the tools to do that. But for the standard at-home sort of mechanic, I think this is a good step with the tips I've already mentioned. Right, clean off the nut as we mentioned before and the washer around it. Give it a good clean and tighten to 36 foot-pounds. You want to see something terrible? New transmission fluid, the old stuff. That is really bad. This car has a transmission dipstick. You can clearly check what color it is and whether it needs a change. So it's just been neglected, which is really, really sad. So just like changing the oil, I dropped 5 quarts again. So you can see 1 gallon, 3.78 litres. There's about another litre in this 2-litre bottle. So that's 4.7 litres is 5 quarts. So now we know we can drop 5 quarts back in the car. And one other thing, recycle responsibly. So collect your oil, transmission fluids and take them all down in one go. I keep mine just next to my house here. Right, so if you haven't spotted the transmission dipstick, I don't blame you, it's super well hidden. Go down here, down here, down here, down here. You see this little dipstick right there? Attach this little tube, that is it right there. So you're about to see why we need this tiny funnel in order to refill that. Why Saturn thought, well, whoever, Honda I guess in this case, thought that that was a good size hole for 5 quarts. Well, I have no idea, but that's why I have the tiny little funnel with me. Surgical tubing also works well. Just work with what you have. So I've pressed my little funnel in. Now I'm going to double up with the bigger funnel to funnel that into the little funnel to get it into the transmission. Okay, so I went all out. I've got a 3 funnel setup. Remember to pour carefully because you're going at the capacity of the smaller funnel at the bottom. Put the transmission refill dipstick back in and start the car. We need to get the engine back up to operating temperatures. Once the transmission fluid is nice and warm, by letting the car run for 10 minutes or so, press the brake and go through each gear on the transmission. Pause for 3 seconds on each setting. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, until you've gone through every range. Stop the car and check the fluid levels. You can see the fluid level is nicely between the two circles there, which means we have adequate level and we don't need to add any. If you've overfilled it, remove the drain plug and adjust accordingly. It's important you get the correct amount of transmission fluid in the transmission. With this transmission, it was so bad that you can see it's still kind of brown. That 60 drain, 60 refill really didn't make it nice and clear, so I will be doing this again in a couple of days time just to really change this transmission fluid and get it refilled properly. That's what happens when you neglect things like this. So I hope you've learnt a lot and enjoyed watching. Let me know how you get on. I've linked all the parts, tools and everything in the description below.